Welcome back to Banned by PBS, Muslims Against Jihad. A reminder, the documentary you're watching was part of a film project originally intended to air on the national PBS network as part of its America at a Crossroads series. It's about moderate Muslims who oppose the radical preachings of jihad. But as you're about to see, some young Muslims, unfortunately, do fall under the spell.
The lure of jihad has perhaps been felt more strongly in Europe, where the Muslim parents and families often have a more difficult task trying to keep their sons from following the Islamists. In March 2003, with war in Iraq approaching, the streets of Paris filled with protesters, many of them Muslims opposed to the war. One of them was Peter Sharif, who had changed quickly and drastically from the young man who had once been described as fun-loving. It was a transformation that his parents, ordinary working-class Muslims, could not begin to comprehend. What they do know is that he met a young French-Algerian street preacher named Farid Benyatou, and after that, nothing was ever the same. It was Benyatou who declared himself to be the imam, or spiritual leader, and Peter Sharif became his follower.
L'imam, c'est quelqu'un qui dirige la prière. Il y a des imams qui vont plus loin, qui prêchent, bien. Il y a des imams qui s'arrêtent là. On appelle ça.
And yet what Benyatou was really looking for were vulnerable young men he could convince to go off and fight in Iraq. And so recruiting Peter Sharif and several others to go to Iraq, Farid Benyatou gave them physical training in one of the most beautiful parks in Paris. None of them were poor or deprived, and yet all answered the call of jihad. In the case of Peter Sharif, what emerged was a young fanatic who was barely recognizable to his mother. One of the most overlooked groups of Muslim moderates are the families, the ones trying to prevent their sons from joining the extremists. Here, Peter Sharif is saying that the Islamists are united against French law, which he claims prevents them from practicing their faith. It is a version of her son his mother barely recognizes.
You can see Peter is not himself. You can see it in his face. He has changed since he has fallen under the influence of Benyatou.
Her son Peter was soon training to go on a holy war against infidels, one of several devoted followers of the charismatic Farid Benyatou. Farid Benyatou, who never went near the war zones, was arrested by French police in January 2005. One of his 19-year-old followers became a suicide bomber in Iraq, and 2 others died in combat. Peter Sharif was captured by the American forces in Iraq. Held since his arrest in Baghdad, he was recently sentenced by an Iraqi court to 15 years in Abu Ghraib prison, leaving his mother with only the same questions being asked far beyond the bounds of her own family.
I've seen his photo, but I've never heard Benyatou speak. I can't understand how my son could have been influenced by this Benyatou, by this 23-year-old boy.
We are back again with Martin Burke and Frank Gaffney of ABG Films, which produced Muslims Against Jihad. You've made shocking allegations about what has happened with some of the public television executives, what they said.
In the first meeting, they said to me, fire your partners. And I said, why? And they said, because they are conservatives.
Nothing else, just they're conservatives, not...
They said, well, this
something.
Gaffney guy, how do you know him? I said, I only just met Frank, and I understand he worked in the Reagan administration. And they said, well, you know, and they said to me something very interesting. Don't you check into the politics of the people you work with? And I said, no, I never have, and I never will.
Frank, do you think it was liberal bias at public television which made them reject the film for the America at a Crossroads series?
I think, Edie, there's no getting around it, that at the beginning there was liberal bias against me. But over time, I think as their efforts to try to prevent this filmmaking team from making the film came to naught, what they then sort of turned to was an effort really to change the story, to bring more of an Islamist flavor to it. It became more and more of an Islamist promotion effort, I think, rather than a liberal promotion effort.
Now, we asked, of course, PBS to appear on the program. They declined. But to be fair, the first part of your 2-hour documentary will air somewhere on public television. So why isn't that good enough?
What we were offered as part of the America at a Crossroads series was primetime common carriage on the network all over the country. And what we're getting instead, and this is no knock on the folks in Oregon, we're very grateful to them for helping here, but we're going to run in Oregon, in the 5 stations out there, and maybe it'll get picked up elsewhere, maybe it won't.
Right. Well, I appreciate talking to both of you gentlemen. Coming up, a surprising, even hopeful conclusion to Muslims Against Jihad, and I'll have a final thought.